So, hello. I'm going to continue creating these spheres for this gear. So, we should be at the center of our grid at this point. Okay, if you're not sure about this, just click on your object and go to channel box and check that you have translate X, Y, Z, all of them to be 0. Okay, this means that you're at the center of the grid. Okay, so now I'm just gonna create these spheres. So I'm gonna start by creating the first sphere. Ooh, it is too big. I'm just gonna scale it down. I'm gonna go to my front view to see it better, and I'm gonna click on this icon, well, not icon, what can I call it? Yeah, let's call it icon, which says wireframe unshaded. So I'm just gonna click on it. It's gonna show me the lines of the object. Okay, so I'm gonna hit W and move this up, and it disappears. Why? Because it is inside this object. Okay, so I'm just gonna go into my perspective view and use this arrow to push it to the front, right? And here I'm gonna push it a little bit down so it's right in this gap that we created here. Okay, so I'm just gonna turn on wireframe unshaded for my perspective view as well. So if you hold your mouse over it, it says wireframe unshaded. That's what we want. I'm just gonna click on it. Okay, gonna just push this inward so it doesn't get too much outside of this shape and it doesn't go inside the wall of the gear. So this looks good. Okay, so now I just want to populate this gap with these spheres, and here I'm going to use some methods with which is going to introduce you to the basics of rigging, and that's what we're going to use for making our object or creature parts in the center of the grid and then move them away and be able to rotate them separately. Okay, so pay close attention. Okay, I'm gonna start by going to my outliner. Again, if your outliner is not anywhere on the sides here, just go to Windows, Outliner, and get to it. Okay, so this is the sphere that I just created. I'm gonna name this, actually rename this to something like SPH for sphere and then 1 and hit enter. The reason that I'm doing the number at the end is that when I duplicate it, Maya is gonna add to this number at the end, and then I'm gonna know then I'm gonna have a sphere 1, a sphere 2, and that would be nice. Okay, so let's see. I'm ready for duplicating this object, right? So if I just duplicate it using Control D and try to match it like this, that would be one way of doing it. But I want to show you another way which is going to be helpful along the way. So before I duplicate this sphere, I'm gonna change the pivot point for these spheres, and in a couple of minutes you're gonna see why I'm doing this. Okay, so remember that we are at the center of the grid, so I want to just change the pivot point for this sphere to be here, right at the center. Okay, so to change the pivot point, holding down D, when this circle appears around the manipulator, it means that I'm changing the pivot point and not the position of the object, right? So holding down V, I'm gonna turn on, well actually let's do that first. I'm gonna go to this snapping menu here and just turn on a snap to grid. Okay, snap to grid is turned on, and I'm gonna hold down D because I wanna snap the pivot point, okay, not the object. So holding down D, I'm in the pivot tool, actually changing the pivot mode. So I'm just gonna hold this, and as you can see, it's trying to snap to places. I'm gonna just click and drag it to this place. It's gonna be snapping to the center until I see that, okay, it is a snap to the center, okay? And make sure to use a snap because we want it to be exactly at the center, okay? It's really important, especially when it comes to rigging and moving objects together. You want the pivot point of all of them to be at one, one point, okay? So I'm just releasing D. As you can see, the circle around the manipulator disappears. It means that I'm in the move mood again. So I'm just gonna go up and turn off the snap, okay? I don't want this, my objects to snap to any grid points anymore, okay? Just gonna click on it. So now I'm gonna go back to my perspective view. Now I have this sphere that, oh, I can see that this, the pivot point is snapped, not at the center, but here. Okay, never mind. Just gonna turn on the snap to grid tool again, holding down V and holding down D, sorry, and then push this here. Now it is at the center. Okay, turning off the snap tool, never forget that. So I can see that the pivot point for this object is now in the center of this gear and in the center of the grid. Okay, so why is it helpful? Look at that. Okay, so now if I hit Control D on my keyboard for duplicate, I do duplicate, I can use rotation to get this sphere to the place that I want it to be. If I hit E, now the manipulator for rotation appears at the pivot point, right? And it's in the center of this gear. So if I just rotate it, I can get it to the place that I want, right? And I can see that I renamed it SPH1 here, so the second one is gonna be called SPH2. So I'm just gonna go ahead and create a bunch of them. And I'm gonna go to the front view because that's gonna be easier to match. Just rotate them. So I'm just hitting Control D for duplicate and rotate them to get them to place. Control D, rotate. This is like if you want to do rigging, and later if you want to be able to pose your creatures, this concept is going to help you along the run, because it's important to be able to have objects move based on the points that you assign to them, like by changing their pivot point, and another tool that I'm going to be introducing in a couple of minutes. So just hitting Control D and rotate. Nice. Okay, I get all my spheres. So this part is done. I get the shape that I want. But I want to show you something else. So let's say I want to move everything together. What if I want to animate all these circles so that they all are rotating in this gear? Okay. So you can go in and rotate them one by one like this, and set keyframes for animation, which we're going to talk about after the mid-semester. So like doing them one by one, but you can also group them together and animate the group. Okay, so what does it mean to group them? So if you look at the outliner, I can see that all these spheres are here from 1 to 16, right? So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a group for them. And a group is a concept in Maya. So you can create a group, and it's basically like a folder, okay? It's going to be containing, it can contain, you know, as many objects as you want. And as you group them, you can then manipulate the group instead of each object, okay? So let's do that so you know what I mean. Okay, so I'm going to select all the spheres here, and to do so I'm going to just click on the first one and then shift click on the last one, and every sphere is selected. Okay, so now for grouping them all, I'm going to hit Control G on my keyboard. As you could see, all of them are now in this group that is created in the outliner. Okay, I'm going to call this group GR SPH. GR for group, SPH for spheres, and hit enter. Okay. So as you can see, if I click on any of these spheres, you can see that in the channel box they have this translation and rotation and everything. But if I click on the group, I just created it, and the translation and rotation for this is 0, like any other object that is created in Maya. By default, its pivot point is at the center of the grid. Okay, it has no rotation and no translation. But the good thing is that this group, it is not represented by any geometry in the scene. So I can just use this to move or rotate or scale any object that is included in the group. Okay, so for example here, if I want to later come in and animate these spheres, I can just animate the group instead of each of them. Okay, so if I click on the group, I can just rotate them all at once. Right? This is cool. And again, because I created the group and I'm rotating all of them with the group, if I want, I can go in and just, rotate them based on their own. Like, I can move them in here or rotate them like this. Well, actually, rotating them like this is not going to be helpful at this point because I changed the pivot point. But, the concept is that you can go in and change manipulation for any of them, like, translation, rotate, scale. But you can also move them all together or rotate them all together using this group concept, right? And let's say, this is a gear and you want to move everything to the top of, for example, your creature, right? So to do that, you can also create groups inside the groups. Like I know that this is one object that I want to have and move around. I can click on this gear object and then click on this, shift click on this group and group them again, like hitting Control G on my keyboard. Now everything is grouped together, and this is my gear group, right? So I'm just gonna double click on it to rename it and say GR gear. Okay, so this is now my gear group. I can select this gear by its own, or I can select this group and move it up, rotate it, and place it anywhere that I want, right? And I can always go back in and put 0 in here to set it at the center, right? And I'm gonna also go in and just assign the whole group to a display layer and just call it gear, actually LR for layer and then dash gear. This way Maya is not gonna tell us, oh, I had this gear. Okay, it says it's invalid, I guess because I just used dash in it. So I'm just gonna go in and say LR capital G. This time Maya does it. Okay, and I'm gonna, for the sake of being at the same page for the naming of the layers, I'm gonna also call this LR as in layer, and then Shift I image plane. I'm gonna get rid of the 1 at the end because then it's not gonna be the same name as the image plane that I have here. I'm gonna say save. Okay. So now you get introduced to this advanced concept that you can use for creating your objects. So you can see it's sometimes very easy to use symmetry and just create everything at the center and then move them to where you want, right? Okay.